Welcome everybody to another episode of one-on-one interviews where today we have Maïmouna Jagne-Soreau. Maïmouna is doing her PhD in Nordic Literature in both University of Helsinki and Paris-Sorbonne, prestigious Paris-Sorbonne. Maïmouna is born to a Gambian dad and a French mom, identifies as French, and crazily enough, she speaks 7 languages. You did not hear it wrongly. She speaks 7 languages, all of the Nordic ones. And since visiting here in 2008 in Finland, she has fallen in love with Nordic languages as well as perhaps Nordic culture. Loves to dabble in some classical music, has been a chorister in different choirs here in Finland, and she's here to tell us a lot about herself. Maïmouna, you're very welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, as you mentioned, I grew up in France, and there I got interested in Finland.
Right.
And it's a little bit the cliche picture that one can have of the North. I had no actually understanding of what Finland is compared to Sweden, Norway, etc. I just have this idea of the North and IKEA,
Yeah.
you know, and midsummer and white dresses, and I was just fascinated by this myth. And quickly, or during high school, actually, my last years of high school, I started to look in a Finnish book, and I got really interested. And then after high school, as my plan of being an opera singer didn't work out, I started to study Finnish, because why not?
Why didn't the plans work out to be an opera singer?
I got, it could have actually, I got in the opera school in Berlin, but they noticed last minute that I was too young, because in France we can graduate a little bit earlier, and I was not 18. And they said that we saved the spot for you, but come back next year when you're 18. So I had 1 year to do something else. And I started to study musicology at La Sorbonne, but it was horrible.
Yeah.
It was so, people were so geniuses, you know, and have been playing the instruments since they were 2 years old, and it was so competitive. Like people were mean to each other to win the competition.
Wow.
So it was not my jam. So after 2 months, I decided, I have to change. I will do something just for fun before I go to Berlin next year.
Very good.
And that's how I ended up taking Finnish, because it was fun.
Yeah. So you came to visit in 2008. What was you coming to visit in 2008 and you coming to live here in 2012? What was the highlight of
what happened? I came to visit in 2008 because my dad lives in Finland. He has been living for almost 20 years, I think now. I hadn't seen him in 15 years, and then he came out of the blue, tell us that, I live in Finland now, you're welcome, with my little brother. So we visit him, and it didn't went really well. It was Christmas time, it was pitch black, it was super cold. My dad is a Muslim, so he doesn't even celebrate Christmas, so it was kind of a fail. But I still got a really good vibe of Finland already back then.
What was this good vibe? Because for me, when I came here, it was the first time, it was in November, and I didn't see the sun for like 7 days. So it was in Kouvola, so I was like, I need to get out of here. But I was convinced to stay since I came to play basketball. So what was the thing that you found so interesting that you would still come back?
I think the people.
Okay.
And not, I know that Finland has this bad stereotype that people are so introvert, but I am very introvert, so for me it was perfect. That people are respectful and they are. Yeah. They don't try to be someone else, and they don't try to take your space, and that was really calming. I felt it directly.
So what about Nordic languages that was interesting to you to study?
I'm not even sure. I think Finnish, it's so different. I mean, it's Nordic, but not Scandinavian languages. I started with Finnish, and I found it so mathematic and fun. It was like playing Lego when you have to change the end and everything. So
interesting.
I found it fun.
It.
And then I had to have, as a part of this study in Finnish, we had to have a second language, and they encouraged us to take Russian or Hungarian or Estonian. But I was interested in the other side, because of this IKEA word. So I took Swedish, and because I have studied German before, and I was on my way to Germany, I picked up Swedish like that. In 2 months I was fluent in Swedish, and then from that it was really easy to learn Norwegian and Danish and all of those.
See, I found it very difficult to learn Finnish. And I still to this day I struggle quite a bit. So how do you end up learning? I'm sure people in the audience would be thinking, how do you end up learning 6 or being able to speak 6 languages? Is there a trick to this?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
You kind of have to decide. When I was in high school, I mentioned I had German. I had German as my first language. And usually in France, if you have German as your first language, it's because you're really good. You're really good at school. It's the elite that has German as first language. I just happened to have it. I was definitely not elite in my class. And I really have the bad attitude. I was always sitting in the back, and I was making fun of the teacher. And I was always having 0 out of 20, which are in my entire school time, I had 0 or like the minimum.
Really?
Yep. And then one summer, we were at my grandma's place in the south of France, in Biarritz, and then I was with my cousin, we were on the beach, and we had some wine, and then there was this group of young German that were just there for the vacation, and then I just came to them and started to speak. And I surprised myself, because I had never opened my mouth in the German classes other than to make some fun of the teacher. And then I realized that, okay, my brain had registered all of those years, and it was there. And it was just about believing in you and just wanted to communicate. It was enough, it was strong enough, and it made it work.
So I sensed some kind of rebelling when you were a bit younger.
Yes.
Considering you could, if you had decided to speak German in class, you could have, but then you decided to rebel against that. Where does that come from?
I don't like to be told stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Just as a principle, I will do the opposite.
One of those. Now, you were born and raised in Versailles, and for me, having seen Versailles from the tourist perspective, it's really beautiful, and especially if you're talking about the palace, Louis XIV. What is life in Versailles like? If you can take me in, what was being young like in Versailles? Or at least it was near Versailles.
It was near Versailles. For me, it was, and it is actually still a struggle to wrap my head around that time, and mostly because of a class issue, I would say. Because Versailles and the surrounding is a really fancy, it's the most expensive suburb in Paris and in France, and there are a lot of private schools, and it's a lot about money but we don't talk about it, but it's like higher class, etc. But my parents, both my mom and stepdad are teachers, and it was never about that. And I was really conflicted with what was my position in that, and that's something I have been really aware, because I was going around with kids, my friends or the people I was hanging out with had different standards, and I couldn't do the same thing that them, and I was always self-aware.
You think this is part of the reason why you kind of rebelled as well, or has no connection? No. That's my nature.
That's my nature.
That's just you.
But I was very self-aware of everything, like of status, of my clothing, maybe. And I think that's something that later on I try to balance with knowledge. Maybe I cannot have all those stuff like the others have, but I know more. So I think that it started like that.
When do you think this was you realized this?
Oh, really early on, when I was 6, 7.
Really?
Yeah.
Right. Fantastic. That's and what do you think was the push for that realization?
Well, racism. Probably. Yeah, because grew up in a village next to Versailles, and it was a really small village with one school, and with my little brother we were the only one that were non-white.
Yeah.
And then my little brother really early on went to a boarding school, yeah. So he was not even around, so I was the only one. And
okay.
I never really understood why I was not fitting in, and my mother was protecting me, trying to hide it and being colorblind, saying that they're just jealous because you're so beautiful and all of this, you know, talking. Yeah. But I knew that something was up.
Right. Wow. Okay, that's some deep stuff. So in that sense, how was family life to you? So for me, as a person born and raised in Gambia, we see family very differently. Big families, up to 100 people, always doing some kind of activity with each other, very close-knit. What was family time to you like?
Actually, not so fun.
Okay.
I'm the oldest of of five, so I have four smaller siblings, and one was in boarding school, and two others have ADHD, or like ADHD, so they are hyperactive, so you can imagine the kind of energy that was running in the family. Yeah. And as I mentioned too, my both parents are teachers, and my stepdad comes from a military background. So it was really strict, discipline. And we had, discipline was in the center, and it was not fun because we had common punitions all the time.
Oh yeah, for everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can see still maybe some connections with the rebelling part. Yeah, but if I can jump a little bit back to your studies. So you got into Sorbonne, which is a big deal in France.
No.
No?
No, I'm sorry, it's not.
At least from the outside looking in,
I know.
Yeah, right?
I know, but in France we don't have an exam to go into university.
Right.
And university, I would say, it's a little bit of a trash if you come on the license level, the first level.
Right, right. Okay.
It's because you didn't had the marks, the grades to go in a better school, or the money to go in a private school.
Right.
And then you end up at university.
Right.
Then if you continue into masters, it means that is good because you have survived the 3 years of 500 people in one classroom, and it's hard to follow, but it's really easy to get in.
Right. So. Right. That's a good clarification because from the outside in, it's everybody talks about Sorbonne or Paris-Sorbonne, and but thinking about languages and the ability to communicate, what was so interesting about languages to you that you decided that this could be my focus?
I think I saw, when I started studying languages, there was a lot about this linguistic and didactic and grammatic. I hate that.
Right.
It's not my jam.
Yeah.
But I love that languages are a key to open a new culture, and that you can actually watch series and movies in this language of the culture that interests you because you know the languages.
Right.
So it has been like that for me.
Yeah. And I can actually, now that you mentioned that, watching a movie, a French movie, and for example, American movie is like night and day. Right. So perhaps maybe there's a thing about languages in there. But so for you, being able to focus on, Finnish language is one of the hardest languages in the world.
That's what people say.
That's what
I've been trying to learn Greenlandic, and it was way more difficult.
Which one?
Greenlandic.
Okay, right.
So
that would be number 8 in that case. So what, even before we continue, because I want to kind of finish on this language thing a little bit. What tips do you give to people like myself who want to learn, some of these languages, but never seem to maybe get the motivation out of it?
My tips is simple. Fake it till you make it. And listen to the radio, watch movies, just fake it. Like I understand this. Maybe you understand one word of 30. But the second time you will understand 2 words out of 30, etc., etc. And then your brain is incredibly active, although you are passive. So.
Right. Good point. Yeah. For the record, I speak a little bit of Finnish. Maybe we can transition a little bit to your work life. At least I should probably ask, what has been all these other jobs you've had before your kind of official job in 2012 in the Helsinki French school in Helsinki? So what has been these other jobs that you've had?
Well, I've done a little bit of everything because I just needed money basically. So I was a telephone operator for the bicycle services in France. So if you have a problem with your with bicycle, etc.
Yeah.
I have been a waitress in a restaurant. I have babysitting a lot. I have help with homeworks.
Right.
Different.
Yeah,
stuff.
Quite varied. And then when you moved to Finland, and that was for just education, or was it just for a job?
That was for education. I came as an Erasmus, so as an exchange student. So I had studied 2 years, 1 year Finnish in France and Swedish 1 year.
Right.
And then the third year I wanted to go abroad.
Yeah.
Finally, I've been waiting so long. And I came to Finland, and I came at the University of Helsinki to complete my bachelor. But I don't have the what is it? Opintotuki, how do you say that in English? The student money.
Student money.
Grant or student loan. I was not eligible to that because I'm not a Finn, and in France we don't have anything like that.
Yeah.
And my parents are definitely not supporting me financially, so I just needed a job. And I started to work at the French school of Helsinki as a special need teacher.
Right.
And there I was working with a little kid that had Asperger's syndrome, but was too violent to go into class with others. So I was going to his place and do school at home with him.
Okay.
And it was a wonderful time. We learned. He couldn't read, he couldn't write, he couldn't do nothing, but he was really smart.
Right.
But after 2 years, he was about to go back into school, and he wrote and read like all of the other students. It was wonderful.
Really? Wow. And you worked with him for how long?
2 years.
2 years, right? Wow, that's impressive. So pretty big achievement from your part.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel to make such a big difference in an individual's life?
I think I start to realize it's just now, like lately, how big it was both for him and for me.
Right.
And it makes me proud actually.
Yeah. Well, we might jump back into that, but if we proceed with the job. So you've done this for 2 years. You're still studying at the university. What was the next track for you?
Then I've done so many things actually. I don't know, 1 year I had 9 different jobs at once. I've been...
That's not illegal in Finland, by the way.
I've been teaching French. It's somehow the French have been like something that have been helping me a lot here because it's really prestigious and people are interested in French. Yeah. So I've been teaching French in different high school and työväenopistot, and also jumping in if a teacher is not there.
Okay. Right.
I've been working with handicapped children and adults also a lot during weekends, and I've been working in a retirement home, also taking care of elderly people, like kind of this care word a lot.
Yeah. Always working with people and somehow
people,
using your French language as well.
Yeah, or also
Finnish.
Swedish actually. I've been working in Swedish, and it also was a really good way for me because it's a little niche.
Yeah.
The Swedish speakers in Helsinki.
Yeah.
And
true.
So via that, I ended up in schools and stuff like that.
So how did you become a lecturer in this case at the University of Helsinki? What was the transition point?
That was part of my PhD. So I graduated my bachelor. It was supposed to be 1 year Erasmus, but I knew that I didn't want to come back in France, and I came here for good. So then I came in the master program, and after 2 years I graduated because in France we have 2 years masters, and then I came in the PhD program directly. So it's kind of and 2 first year of my PhD I just continue working full time next to of my studies because I've always done that. But after 2 years I got a salaried position at the University of Helsinki for my PhD.
Right.
So it was a big shock for me. Actually, not only a good one, but like from being running around and studying on the side and doing 9 jobs at the time. I was just like, I had to quit all of my jobs and focus on this, writing the PhD. So it was really hard to adjust in the rhythm. But as a part of the contract, I was supposed to teach 5% of my time at the university. So via that I started to lecture at the University of Helsinki.
How do you get to have that paid position in the PhD?
It's a long process. You have to send your project, your PhD, what you're doing, how long you have been coming, etc. Then they select some, and then you have interviews and presentation, and then they really look. And they take only the year I came in, they took 3.
Out of how many?
500. It's the old program.
Right. So what makes you stand out? What do you think were the things that actually made you stand out so much that you were the 3 out of the 500?
Maybe I would say that because I have something to say. Like I'm not doing a PhD to do a PhD. I'm doing a PhD because I saw a problem in Nordic literature, and I'm really willing to fix this problem. So it makes me like having a different stamina, maybe.
Right. So this is interesting because then perhaps soon we should segue into your PhD studies. So you're currently your current focus, perhaps you can.
Yeah, I'm almost finished.
Yes.
So I have had now it's the it's the 3rd year of in my salaried position, but I started this project like 4.5 years ago.
Right.
And it's I've always wanted to be somehow a professor, but I've never really thought concretely of a PhD, what I would do, or anything like that. But in my last year of master, it was my last class of master we were learning how to do to write a debate article in literature. And we had just one exercise. Everybody wrote the same book, a poetry collection by a Palestinian-Danish poet, Yahya Hassan. And we were 10 in the class, and everybody wrote the same, read the same, and then we wrote a debate article on this topic. And then we share each other's article, and we had to read everyone's paper before we came to the class, and we would discuss. And when I read the 9 other papers, I thought that, I cannot come to the class because I was so out of topic. It's humiliating. And I still decided to come, and especially as it was my last class. And the thing is that I realized there that, everybody has written about immigration problems and problem with Islam in Danish society and racism in a bad way, etc. And I wrote about how funny it was and the irony that reminded me of Voltaire. And I was so out of the thing, but with the discussion I realized that it was not that they were wrong and I was right, or I was wrong and they were right, but it's just that I was seeing so much more than they were seeing. Of course I saw the problem of racism in that, but I thought there was so much more.
But you thought further,
and I was thinking that, if they cannot see it, maybe I have something to show here, because I think it's really important that when you read this kind of book, that you see the problem, the patterns, etc., but that you can see also the fun, because it's the best part.
So you see past the obvious. I am sure the audience is as interested as I am in finding out a little bit more about what you wrote. So what were the key parts about the fun part that you saw in or at least the irony?
Well, I'm not sure if it's going to be fun for you to read, because it's still an academic paper and it's in Danish.
Wouldn't be, yes.
But it's about, it's a lot about, there is something called, the white guilt, and the Scandinavian guilt is a little variation of that. And it's something that for a lot of Scandinavian audience, they don't allow themselves to laugh if they read something that is talking about racism, that is talking about a hard life with an abusive father, etc. Is so harsh that you want to respect the story and you stay there. But you can also see a mix it can be hard on one side, but then it can be really fun on the other side. But you have to believe also that the writer is smart enough to have laid a little bit of irony there.
Right, right, got you. And just for the 9 others, perhaps thinking, if they would allow themselves to think from that perspective, maybe the guilt would take over in that sense. But then you feel that you don't have to put yourself in that box.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So this basically led to your PhD, what you're studying now, which kind of focuses on questions of racism, whiteness or non-whiteness, and the sense of belonging, if I'm correct. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a kind of it's broad to define like that, yes. But really concretely, I focus on in the literature, not the writers necessarily, but in the literature when there is a character in a book, fiction book or novel or theater or rap text. I also work with rap texts.
Okay.
When a character is second generation migrant, non-white, mixed race or transnational adoptees. So what all of those 3 groups have in common is that they are born and raised in the Nordic countries, but they are non-white.
Right.
So people are always asking them, where are you from? Like, really from?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So in my time here in Finland, have met quite a bit of people who are mixed race, second generation, who have always had this problem with their identity, because since they were young, especially the older ones, since they were young, there's this continuous question about where you're from, as if to, point to your difference, that you kind of might not belong here, even if they don't mean it that way. That is how it is received. What has your studies shown in this? Has there been a change in the language, or has it still remained the same?
Well, if I would be a sociologist, maybe I could answer the question. But as a literature scholar, I could just constate that in the books, that's something that is recurring.
Right.
And it's recurring in different register, different with different vibe, I would say. Sometimes it's really tragic and sad.
Yeah.
But most of the time, as I was mentioning, it's ironic and a lot of humor about that.
Yeah.
So kind of, letting it go with humor, and I think that's really fascinating to see.
Right. But if you move a little bit further, because in your PhD, you're talking about post-nationalism, or is it post-nationalist?
Not really in my PhD. I talk about post-migration generation.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. But then if you maybe give us a bit of better understanding here, because you maybe propagate or at least push the term post-nationalist. Why is that?
Well, what I've been doing is that, because I'm not the first one who looks at text of second generation, literature. But my difference is that instead of taking the traditional post-colonial starting point or the really popular multiculturalism, because this is what literature scholars have been doing when looking at this literature. They are saying, oh, it's multicultural. This is the new Finland, blah, blah, blah. I looked to it from this post-national perspective, that is to be there is no Finland and multicultural others. What I'm saying is that it's only Finland. Right. You have to renew what Finland means so that everybody can be included in that. Yeah. And from that you look at the literature as Finnish literature, not as immigrant literature, for instance. So it was the big discussion that are those books a part of the immigrant literature? What I'm saying, no, this is Finnish literature, but we need to broaden the definition of Finnish literature.
Help us juxtapose a little bit between the society here in Finland and what France has gone through or continues to go through, having a very diverse society. What similarities or differences do you see?
On this aspect?
On this aspect,
well, I think when I arrived here, or I wrote an essay about post-nationalism, and I think I was a little bit naive, maybe towards France, what they have been doing, because in my mind it's so much better in France. No one in France asks me where I'm from. Or if they do, they want to know if it's Versailles or if it's Marseille, or you know. But they will never ask it in this sense that people ask in Finland, because they relate to your ethnicity and they want to know, were you brown or black? Yes. So for me, that's much better. But then I also understood that later on by talking with other people that it can be a problem, because I didn't grow up with my Gambian father, so I don't, and I've never been to Gambia, so I don't really relate to that. I don't have a, it's not, I don't want to talk about Gambia because I don't know anything about it. And I feel really pressured when people ask me about Gambia here. But I realized that maybe if you know, if you have been living half your life in Gambia and half in France, and people are negating that from you, you are French, and they don't ask you ever about Gambia, and you're not allowed to talk about it. Maybe that's not good either.
Yeah, the other side of it. I think there was a bit of a backlash when France won the World Cup the last time, because then you saw all the players who had mixed parents from different parts of Africa, or
actually migrated to France.
Or migrated to France, right?
So it's a little bit this colonial
shadow,
and I've been a little bit blind to it as a French. But now I see a little bit better through it, that it can be negative. But in my situation, it was the best. So that's something maybe I try to offer here as an alternative, that you don't have to feel obliged to relate to your parents' country if you've never been there, or if you don't feel anything coming there.
Right, but this ability to be accepted for who you are, regardless whether you relate to where your parents come from or your parent comes from or not, just being accepted for who you are.
But the question is, how do you know who you are, right?
Whatever that is.
No, but I mean, it's important, because you define yourself from what the society tells you what is important. And society told me that, French culture, French food, blah, 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 this is important. So I define myself as French. But if I would have grown here and people would have said multiculturalism is so important, and your parents' background is so important, and then you start to define yourself as that.
Right, but even for people who always don't follow the same grain, who move out on the other side and say that, okay, what you're defining me as, I am not one of them. I don't want to be part of this mixed race that you are now defining. I just want to be my own person, right? How do you think, from the literature that you've read, and I'm not sure if this has any relation to your PhD or not, but what signs do you see that point to having a society that is that inclusive of all these sense of belongings, that okay, I consider myself Finnish, or I consider myself Gambian, or I consider myself a mix, or I am a European citizen. What do you think? Where has the literature been pointing towards a solution for this kind of?
Well, that's exactly what I'm pinpointing and studying, because I talk, as I said, about the post-migration generation, and this is me. This generation doesn't exist. This is me gathering this person here saying something, and this person saying something here, and here, and I see a pattern. So I put it together, and I said there is tendency here, and there is a generation, a want for a new community in the community, and this community is the one that is racialized in the Nordic countries, but is born and raised there. Right.
And do you see you in this community?
I'm not born and raised in the Nordics.
Right. I mean, but then also there are people who moved here who actually do feel a sense of Finnishness, even though they moved.
Yeah, but it's not the same, because I'm French, but I'm an immigrant, and I'm an immigrant here.
Good point.
You know, and then I'm mixed race. So in this way, because of being mixed, I can relate by transfer. But that would be a discussion I would need to have in France. But it's not relevant to have in France.
Yeah, good point. Out of all these things that you've been doing, interesting things, what would you say is the most rewarding, or has been the most rewarding?
I think maybe this anecdote that I was telling about this this little kid at the French school,
Right.
Because it's a big thing, I think, putting someone through school.
Yeah.
But anytime I am, not anytime, but the times I'm teaching and I get feedback, especially when it's from youngsters, that's really touched me, and especially when it's second generation or mixed race teenagers that tell me, wow, I never thought about my identity this way, thank you.
Right.
That opening the perspective of identity, I think this is for me the jackpot.
Fantastic. Now this helps us segue a little bit, because you mentioned the young kid you were helping who has Asperger's symptom. And you have been a bit vocal about having Asperger's symptom yourself, or syndrome.
Syndrome.
Right. How would you define it for people who don't know what Asperger's symptom is? Or syndrome?
Well, there is still a lot of research, so even doctors are not sure what it is, but I think a kind of good way to define it is that it's my brain, our brains, the people who have Asperger's, is wired in a different way. And physically you can see it in scans that I have some zone of my brain that are overactive while others are not. And that's, for instance, the zone that in my brain that is not active is what is supposed to give me coordination and right and left sense, and I cannot do that. So, and it shows in people in different ways. It can be like more debilitating in some people than it can be in others. But mostly what we have in common is that social relationships are like kind of a wild game. We don't really know what is supposed to be done, or so I have been diagnosed really late. So I didn't know that I had Asperger when I was working with this little Asperger kid.
Wow, really?
But maybe that's why I felt so comfortable with him, because I could relate.
Yeah. In our last, when we had the influencer meeting, you mentioned a little bit about, you talked about the Asperger symptom or syndrome that you had, and you mentioned how much energy it takes you just to be in a gathering with a lot of people. How do you deal with that? How does it affect your way of life?
That's why I usually say that Asperger syndrome is a superpower, because I'm not sure how I deal with that, because there is so much energy going into looking you in the eyes now when you are talking, or that I'm always so self-aware of my body language and all of that, and the people in the room and the space and the light and the smell. I'm incredibly sensitive to smell. I can cry or vomit over a smell that doesn't fit me. So it's always having this background, you know, managing. And then on top you need to be smart and talking. If you think back though, since you've just been recently diagnosed, if you think back from the younger days, what kind of points come to mind that kind of points to this Asperger syndrome that you have? Oh, there are so many, but maybe just the way I was fascinated by the crowd and the people and these others around me.
The growth of the people?
The crowd.
Oh, the crowd,
The people in my class, you know, classmates, and it was so fascinating. I was really observing and trying to mimic, but never, I could not fool anyone, you know. But I was like, and I was genuinely not understood what was wrong with me and why I couldn't be a part of the group. And I was trying, but, you know, kids, they kind of sense this kind of stuff.
So this is kind of making fun of the teacher, making fun of others, maybe? Was this kind of things that you were doing?
I think it was quite obvious. And then just having literature as a, there I'm safe. Then I can just observe, and I'm not asked to perform anything, and it's really a safe space. And
that clearly links to your PhD now, being able to just focus on the books and not have to deal with too many people. This is quite awakening. But we'll move this a little bit further and go to another fun bit about yourself. How do you see success? How do you define success?
I think it's a really hard question.
It is.
I think for me, success is happiness. And then you can ask me, what do I think about happiness?
Yes.
But somehow success doesn't sound good to me. I think it sounds scary, and it sounds demanding, and it sounds like something that can crash, you know?
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've never heard it defined that way.
Yeah. I don't like success. I don't want to be successful.
So it's almost like you are putting an ending, a stop to where success is, that once you reach it, there's a possible drop or stop.
Yeah, because you cannot be successful all the time in this way, right? Or can you? I don't know. But I think this is something I'm afraid of it, and I'm also afraid that it will be some kind of a drug, you know, that you're hooked on something, and then you just want to make everything just for success. The same way you would be hooked on money, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, but then you mentioned happiness. So what is happiness to you?
Well, happiness, it always have to move. It cannot be a one fixed thing, but happy for me is just being happy in my body, you know, in a happy place at the time, with people that I like and doing stuff that I enjoy. Yeah. And this can vary.
Right.
I'm really happy writing my thesis and being in an archive with all books sometimes, as I'm really happy to have, you know, just watch a movie on my own, or be at the MKY, or but or having a collection of everything, so I cannot pick one thing.
Yeah, makes sense. What inspires you? I guess this could tie into the happiness piece as well.
I'm not really sure, actually. It's a recurring question, but as I mentioned, I've always been so fascinated by others because I felt so different, and I'm always trying to understand how they work so that I will be more accepted. Right. So I'm always looking at others, but I'm not sure if this is a positive inspiration. Right. But I think happiness inspires me, my own and others people's happiness. When I feel that we are going to a good direction, I want to push that.
So, turning this around a little bit, how do you see failure? Because when you talk about success, it almost sounded like you're talking about failure. So how do you see failure?
I don't know, there was this, I read, I don't remember who wrote it, but that there is no failure. You succeed or you learn. Right. Right? Yes. And I like that. Yeah. But it's a journey to come to this conclusion that I learned something. Right. So failure is always a crash. It's hard. It's hard. It's often for me humiliating. Yeah. But I always try to take the perspective so that I convince myself, I fake it till I make it, that I have learned something there. What is it? What did I learn? Right. So I turn it around.
What would you say has been your moments of learning? What would you say is something you can pinpoint to as what others would term failure, but then you have seen as a big learning?
Well, I could name a lot, especially in social interactions, but related to my work, maybe the way I started, it's not a failure again, it's like I needed to learn and I have learned, but I was a little bit too frontal, I think, with my study. And I talk about something that is so taboo, that is, racialization and whiteness and stuff like that, to a Finnish conservative literary group of scholars. Yeah. So that was a fail, definitely, because no one wanted to hear about that, and they kind of pushed me, and I lose some time into coming to my point, because I needed to learn the vocabulary and the angle and the pedagogy of talking about those issues. Right.
So if we maybe ask this a little bit differently, I know that someone with Asperger syndrome their life is packed with routines, right? So what are these routines or habits that you have that help you become, the successful woman you are today? What is?
It's so, I'm so blind to it because it's all around. Right. But I think that the most important, something that, like a useful routine, because you can have stupid ones, but useful for me is to always mentally review what I'm going to do today.
Right.
And mentally prepare. And sometimes, and when it gets too overwhelming and it's too much, I wrote it down.
Right.
This is going to happen. It's not a to-do list.
Right.
Sometimes I can do to-do list, but just to compartment and see what is going to happen.
What advice would you give your younger self? Let's pick 18-year-old self. Because you would have just transitioned, where just picking to start studying the languages. You just turned down the Berlin school.
I would not give an advice. I will give compliments. I will say, well done. Okay. You have been doing great. You're going to do great. Right. I will give me a hug and encourage. And yes, you feel like a weirdo, but it's fine. Yeah. And later you will discover why. Right. Right. Maybe just go to a neuropsychiatrist already now, so that you get your. I don't know if I would have what would have happened if I would have been diagnosed earlier. Yeah. But I would like to give me a hug.
Nice. I like that very much. Yeah.
Self-empathy. Learning.
I've always thought I would give myself an advice, but that's a great idea.
What would you give yourself?
Well, I would have told myself to trust the process.
Yeah, but that's similar.
It's kind of cliche, right? But yeah.
It's similar.
Yeah. Because when you were, at least when I was that age, I thought I knew everything. So it's always quite awakening when you start realizing that you actually don't know everything. I guess the famous quote that knowledge starts when you know how much you don't know.
Yeah, right. But if you realize at this age how little you knew, I would have been frightened, and I would not have dared to do anything.
Good point. Yeah, that's another good point. Can you share a book or a quote or anything that has meant something significant to you that you have used before, or anything that you have maybe even gifted to people that?
No, that's really I cannot think of a quote like that or a book, because there are so many, you know, and then I will feel like if I quote Nietzsche, then what about Kant and whatever. Right. But I like something that my supervisor has been telling me, and that has been encouraging me since that is that a good dissertation is a finished dissertation. And I like this idea. Right. You can put it down to everything. Like, a good project is a finished project. It's not going to be perfect, but you just need to give it your best shot. And
Right. I have a last combination of questions for you. And one of the things that you've written, you've written here that my primary goal is to pragmatically make the world a better place by solving problems and offering innovative perspectives. What kind of problems do you foresee to solve, or do you like to solve, apart from the PhD stuff here?
Well, for my PhD, it's really obvious questions of racism and racialization. Belonging, identity, both for second generation, mixed race, transnationalities, persons that are racialized and victim of racism. But now looking at my postdoc possibilities, I'm really interested in the topics of whiteness. Right. So I'm really interested in solving problems that are to do with how you are living with yourself. Right. And how we are living with each other. Okay. Like after that. Yeah. But I insist on the pragmatical, because you can have a lot of utopia and big ideas and beautiful dreams, but I want to make a concrete step. And that's why I hope that my research will not be as relevant in 10 years or 15 years, because it means that this is so obvious. You know, we have come to that. So
good
that's
point.
my goal.
Yeah, very good. In that sense, if you look at your life, what you've achieved so far, what would you want your legacy to be? What do you think your legacy would be now? Deep questions.
That's
you can quote Nietzsche now.
Because I think it depends of the audience also, you know. Are we talking about the world, the media, my students, my family, my boyfriend, my cat is called Nietzsche. I kid you not, my cat is called Nietzsche. Wow. But what my legacy would be.
From what you've achieved so far.
Yeah. I don't know, just another take on questions of racialization.
Okay.
Yeah, and like a national identity and national belonging.
Yeah. Would that be different from what you would like your legacy to be after you're long gone?
Yeah,
Let's say 110 years.
Yeah, I would
with
like
the medicine.
to broaden it, because now it's so specific to my PhD topic, but I would like my legacy to be to open horizon of literature, that like to make more people think that literature is super cool.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be a good legacy.
What do you have to tell people out there who want to be like Maïmouna Jagne-Soreau?
Good luck.
And for that, we end this discussion. Hey, thank you very much for coming.
Pleasure.
Yeah, great stuff.